Hey everyone, welcome back to another Warlock Sanctum interview where we're interviewing paid GMs. Today we have Sean with us.
That's right. Hello.
Hello. I really should have asked your first name before that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Sean, and we'll dive
Awesome.
into
Thank you.
this.
Yeah, my first name is Sean. My full name is Sean Patrick Cain. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns, and I currently live on Occoneechee Saponia land in rural North Carolina, right outside Greensboro. I work primarily in education. I was a classroom teacher and school administrator for I guess 18 years. Now I do some education consulting work, some visual arts, community organizing, and game design and other game related stuff, which is why I'm here today. So thank you so much for having me.
No problem, no problem. So we start off with the first question. How long have you been doing paid GMing?
Great. Well, I am pretty new to the paid side
Mm-hmm.
of GMing. This is the first year that I've been kind of actively like opening up my tables and recruiting, strangers who want to give me money to tell stories with them. But I've been working in kind of a formal game community organizing for about 5 or 6 years. I started developing a meetup in Northern California that became very popular in our area, which focused on all sorts of different analog games, including role-playing games, which is how I kind of got started GMing for newcomers and strangers and folks in the community. And so that's been kind of the arc from that to here.
Very cool. It's always good to see new people coming in. Um, So you've obviously been running games for at least a few years. What do you figure as a storyteller, what is your two biggest strengths?
Oh, so I think first is my background as an educator and teacher. I think that I bring a lot of my own kind of teaching practice and pedagogy and principles to the game table, which can take a number of different shapes from kind of like thinking about how to kind of formally welcome and build community in a short period of time to literally how to teach games, which I think is one of the things that books don't do a really great job of explaining. And oftentimes that turns into a lot of overwhelming information right at the beginning, which isn't all, in addition to being sometimes kind of intimidating for new folks, I think is also not the most exciting way to start a night. And so I think about how to kind of structure games and sessions through those kind of teaching principles of how to build active engagement early, how to kind of slowly feed information as needed to make sure that folks are always with you, not only with like the rules and mechanics, but also with like the story you're telling. And so I really love thinking through that practice. Um, I think my second strength is that I have a background in photography and film. And so I think with that combined with some theater work I did when I was younger, allows me to avoid what I'm not good at, which is like character voices, and still build a really cohesive cinematic world using the language of cinema and theater to kind of build through those conventions.
Very cool. Very cool. Once again, I am surprised by a guest and their background. I had no idea you had any kind of film connections or anything. Very interesting. Um, if you had to pick two, what are your two favorite systems to run for people?
Ooh, that's a really great question. Does Powered by the Apocalypse count as a system, or do I have to pick a particular game?
Well, it counts as a system, but I'm going to follow that up with what's your favorite out there to run?
Great. So I love running PBT games. It was one of the first games that I kind of like dug into. I kind of totally circumvented the traditional kind of D&D fantasy route of role playing and kind of started right in the indie scene. Um, for newcomers, I feel like I have always like had a great success running Monster of the Week and Brindlewood Bay for folks that have never played a role-playing game before. I think part of that is just because we've all seen those stories before and are familiar with like the beats and the conventions, but also because those games do such a great job of kind of building a collaborative agency with the players that it feels a lot less like me having to tell them what to do and
Mm-hmm.
more that kind of conversational responsiveness that I really love in role playing games. Um, if I had to pick a second game or system, um, I've been spending a lot of time with Blades in the Dark. I'm getting ready to run a campaign that's built specifically for people who have not yet played that game system. Um,
Oh, nice.
and it can be, there's a lot going on in Blades in
Hmm.
the Dark. There are a lot of little things that all feed into each other. And I think as I plan for that campaign and dig into the mechanics and the relationships between those, I find that like there's some really, really smart, exciting stuff that when I, as the facilitator, get to tell people at the table, when I'm like, don't worry about your inventory, you can just tell me you don't like this result. You can just have a flashback and solve a problem like that, like no harm. Uh, the look of kind of excitement around that level of like narrative ownership is really, really cool. And so I'm always looking for games that build that kind of collaborative element.
Absolutely. Forged in the Dark is one of my favorite systems out there, and the evolution of watching it go from Powered by the Apocalypse to what it's become, and just
Yeah.
seeing the evolution of game design is. I'm going to get off topic again if I keep going down this line. All
No,
right.
please do.
Oh, well, our last guest, we ended up doing 40 minutes of talking about game design. So for a 20-ish minute interview, that's maybe not the best route. um, we have been all hit by this plague the last couple of years and everything else. Do you find yourself using virtual tabletops? And if so, how do you make the best use of them online?
Yeah, I have always used a lot of virtual space in the games I facilitate. And the pandemic really hit that. The community that I was running in Sacramento was built entirely around home games. Uh, Literally like inviting strangers into your home to touch your stuff and play some games with you. And obviously, the pandemic really messed that up. So the transition to virtual was pretty essential. I personally am someone who does not love a lot of stuff on the screen. Um, so when I'm running virtual games, I like to take a maximalist approach to all the papers I have around me, but a pretty minimal approach to what people are doing digitally. And part of that is just convenience. I think when you're working with a set of players with a variety of experiences, things as simple as, character keepers in Google Sheets or virtual dice rollers can provide some assistance, but also can sometimes be an obstruction to like smooth gameplay. And everyone knows how to pick up a pencil and everyone knows how to roll a pair of dice. And so I find that when I'm facilitating online games, I try to keep it pretty simple. So I've used Roll20, I've used, Zoom. I like Discord just because it's easy and free. And we can have those very convenient channels where I can put all those reference materials and character sheets and things like that. But I often, especially with newcomers, will encourage folks to, you know, I'll tell them to, print out the character sheets. Don't worry about anything else. I'm going to take you through everything, but the screen is really for us to be interacting with.
Very cool. All right. So the answer is use them sparingly.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like it's one of those things where I sometimes see folks um, spending a lot of time with the kind of digital visual elements of the game. Um, that for me as a player, when I'm in those games, don't often add to my level of immersion or focus. For me as a player, I often find that I am either fiddling or trying to figure something out, and my focus isn't necessarily on the person who's got the spotlight at the moment. And so for me as a facilitator, I'm kind of coming from that. And I know that many people have very different experiences and comfort levels with that, but that's kind of like how I like to run games.
Nice. It's nice to see everyone has their own strategies and such, and
Mhm.
hopefully the audience, this helps you decide what your comfort levels are and such. But getting into a little more, this is the question that almost derailed the last one. You're also a game designer. What are a
Yeah.
couple RPGs that you've gotten out there, or what do you have in the works right now? Like, what has your focus?
Yeah. So I've been working kind of semi-professionally in game design for about 2 years. It started as a pandemic project, and I was lucky and fortunate enough to produce a couple games that kind of found an audience. The first kind of really big game that I released was a solo game called Long Haul 1983, which is a game based on the Wretched and Alone system that came out in early 2020. It's a game. The Wretched is a game that uses a Jenga tower and a set of dice and cards to kind of tell the story of a lone astronaut on a space station that is eventually going to succumb to either death from the environment or the alien that's trying to get in. It's a
Oh,
pretty bleak game, but it also works really well as a solo game. So Long Haul 1983 was my kind of riff and remix on that. I changed a number of the mechanics, but kept some of the basic principles. And I think one smart thing I did that I didn't realize till afterwards was because it's a solo game, I didn't want it to be a traditional journaling game of like writing stuff down. Just
okay.
because, again, as a player, that's not something that really excites me. So in Long Haul 1983, you play a truck driver in the early 80s, kind of amidst this world emptying apocalypse. And in the structure of the game, every day or every chapter, you find a payphone and make a call and leave an answering machine message to someone you're trying to get to. That's kind of the goal of the game. And so what happens is that in that game, you create a series of voice recordings that become this really awesome artifact of your story. Which also means that it's really, really easy to transition into like a more formal audio production, podcasting series, and things like that. So there have been some really amazing, very deep dives into the game where people have created entire series of like, 8, 10, 12 hour games of their play and their recording. And those have been really, really exciting to listen to. Um, my other games are all kind of interested in kind of remixing and performance and kind of embodiment in different ways. I've created two games that both have the main title of Fake Chess, which
I see
started
that.
as a really dumb joke where I was like, wouldn't it be funny if we had a game where it looked like you were playing chess but weren't? Right? Like whenever
Okay.
you watch, I think I was watching the Queen's Gambit, and I was like, God, this always looks so cool, but it's such an inaccessible game for people who want to take it seriously. There's a lot of gatekeeping and elitism around it. Like, how can we kind of tear that down? And so, fake chess was a little experiment that became really popular, I think, because it's such a ridiculous idea. And so I then last year created a big sequel called The Book of Champions, which takes the basic idea and then develops about a dozen different actual character playbooks. So if you want to play the main character from Queen's Gambit who's staring at the ceiling and popping pills, if you want to play Lawrence Fishburne's street hustler character in Searching for Bobby Fischer, if you want to play the Angel of Death and the Seventh Seal, those are all actual built-in playbooks to the game with their own play styles and rules and things like that. Um, that's been really fun. And so those are my
Very cool.
two most popular games. My most recent one is a game called Tattoo, which again comes from a pretty dumb joke because it is a hack of the game Taboo. Do you know Taboo, the guessing game?
I do
Um,
not.
so Taboo is like an old American party game where basically like you get a card with a clue at the top and then a series of words that you're not allowed to say. And so you have to kind of, in a very convoluted way, try to get your team to name the word you're saying. So, if the word was penguin, you couldn't say bird, you couldn't say tuxedo, you couldn't say ice. So you'd have to, find some other way around it. And the comedy there is always in the very convoluted answers.
Mhm.
So Tattoo takes that and turns it into a role playing game, where basically, if you imagine a reality show of hot, scummy tattoo artist working at a tattoo parlor. That's the premise of the game. It's a party game, so it's a role playing game that you can play in 90 minutes. And basically, everyone takes turns playing tattoo artists where you're actually doing competitive doodling and drawing. But every round, one person's going to be a very unhelpful client. And the way that mechanic works is they're going to draw a full hand of taboo cards that become the tattoo design that they have to very ineffectively and atrociously articulate following the rules of taboo. So it's a really great way of getting people in character without necessarily having them to have backstory and motivations and things like that. Like the cards take care of it, and it's always one of those like lovely disasters at the table that is really really fun to play.
I almost exclusively dislike party games, but this sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like, as someone who really loves role-playing games, like, I wanted a game that I could play with my family who are not really in the RPG culture. I also felt like wouldn't it be great if you had a game that you could go start to finish in 2 hours, I played a game of Dialect recently and it felt so good to have like this complete arc in just 120 minutes.
Mhm.
And so that was definitely a motivating factor. And also just like finding ways of kind of on the flip side having people who have a big kind of party game or board game circle, but maybe aren't used to role playing games, like how can you smuggle some RPG stuff into a more typical party game to kind of introduce them to some of those ideas around building character and narrative while still also, competing for points and laughing at each other's drawings and things like that.
I do love the concept where RPGs can be kind of put into other things and it starts to blur the line. You're not really sure if it's still a board game or a card game or an RPG. And it's the ones that make you question that everyone's still having fun that I find to be some of the best experiences.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Maybe not the best role playing game, but like the really good experiences. Like when I first started playing legacy board games, they took the like concept of the continuality. It just blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, like legacy board games. I had an amazing game with my partner's family or in Dead of Winter
Mm,
one holiday, which is like again like it's a board game with like some storytelling elements, but if you get into it, suddenly these narratives start to emerge and the conflicts start become very like deep and personal and passionate. And so, you know, I'm very much someone who doesn't really care about like the label of what we call a certain game or game experience. I think it's more about like how does it actually feel to be doing it at the table. And so a lot of my own game design work kind of intentionally messes with those clear delineations of genre and form.
yeah, well, while we have you here, do you have anything behind the scenes that you're working on that's got you really hyped?
Yeah, so I am currently working on a new collection of small games that I'm going to publish as one big kind of book. They're all games that can be played in between like 30 and 90 minutes. They are role playing games. They're all duet games, which to me is like a nice way of making it accessible to people who may not have a big group of folks. And the central mechanic behind all of them is I'm using a Connect Four board. So if you imagine two players sitting with the Connect Four board in the middle, not actually playing Connect Four, but using those physical pieces in very different ways, imagine how you can make it kind of a map and world building game
Mm,
using the colors to kind of build iconography. Imagine if you're talking about, a game between two, telephone operators in the 1950s sitting at that switchboard. There's a certain kind of diegetic use to that piece. And so I've been spending a lot of time just brainstorming and letting my imagination go with like how else could we use this one very simple tool to tell a number of very kind of complicated personal stories. And so that's what I'm working on. And I'm hoping to have something ready in the next couple months to start sharing and playtesting.
nice, nice. You'll have to let me know when that comes out so I can share it with my Discord server because that sounds really neat.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so getting back on the topic of paid GMing, um, so this is usually my final question before we just let you promote whatever you want. You have a new group coming in about 3 hours. You know they all have experience with RPGs, but you don't know which ones. They're new to you. They're playing tonight. What system are you grabbing, and what hook do you have to kind of bring them right into the story?
Yeah. I am. Can I ask a clarifying question about the group?
Possibly.
Um, okay. So my possible question is, do we know if they are into fantasy or not?
You have no idea what genre they're looking for. They are
Okay.
looking for a game to
Um,
see what you're like.
yeah. I'm gonna go Apocalypse World. I'm gonna just go back to that original PBTA game. I have found incredibly meaningful, like memorable game experiences with the player and an MC using the Apocalypse World system. Um, and I feel like it's specific and particular enough that no one's going to come in being like, oh, this is just like some other game that I've played a lot of, right? Um, but I feel the way that game introduces character through the playbooks the way we could spend the first 20 minutes just kind of doing a little bit of world building as those characters start to come into clarity, and then just kind of revving up and seeing what happens in 3 hours. I think the momentum that a good MC can bring to that game, and the way those playbooks just kind of very effortlessly push people into big dramatic decisions and conflicts, I think that would probably be my go-to game to kind of see what happens at the table.
Cool. So you're just going to draw the hook from whatever comes of the character creation, or do you have something in mind?
No, I would say, well, for setting wise, whenever I run Apocalypse World, I like to set it in a very small space. So you imagine like a tiny island, or, some kind of weird, small, kind of like landlocked body. One of my most memorable games was a home game I ran with a few friends in that community and in California. And one person was picking like a gladiator style playbook. One person was playing like a cult collective of characters, and then one person just randomly grabbed the book where you don't really have direct influence. You are someone who runs a radio station, and kind of it becomes almost like a second supplementary MC role. And we were like, okay, well, the person who runs the radio station is a debaucherous nightclub owner. And so this entire 4 hour game involved people traveling to this nightclub and then seeing that pressure cooker of these five different characters inside it. And it was great. It was so fun. So I feel like having that setting emerge from a couple character choices and how they might come together, and then keeping it really small, tight, and confined, I
Mm-hmm.
think works really, really well for that kind of game.
Hmm. Interesting. I like that answer. All right. um, so yeah, is there anything before we say goodbye that you want to promote, or like any upcoming games you have? Just note to the audience, I'll put the links below. But
Yeah, sure. I mean, thank you so much for giving me this space and having me on. And so, yeah, so if you're interested in those odd games that I was describing that I myself have designed, the best place to go is my itch page. It's just my initials, spc.itch.io, where you can find all the games and modules that I've written. There are always free community copies available. So for folks that are interested but may not have the funds to buy games, there are always free copies available. And then if you want to join me at a table, I have a Start Playing account, which is just my name, Sean Patrick Cain. And you can find a number of games that I'm running in the coming months, which I know includes that Blades in the Dark for Newcomers campaign. It includes bespoke one-shots of games like Thirsty Sword Lesbians and Monsters of the Week, and a few other games that I'm about to put on the calendar very soon.
very nice. Very nice. All right, Sean, it's been good to have you. Um,
No, it's been such a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for having me.
yeah, got this back down to the proper time frame. I apologize to the audience who's seen the last episode, and I love design talk, and we had some design talk here, but I know I do try and keep these to 30 minutes tops. But yeah, this is Sean. If you're looking for, sounds like Powered by Apocalypse for the Dark, or some incredibly designed indie stuff, you should definitely reach out to them. His links will be in the show notes below, and I hope everyone has a great week. It's been good to have you, Sean.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great to be here. And thanks everybody for
Yeah.
listening.
Bye, everyone.